If you are a shooting sports competitor, it would make sense to choose a 9mm over a 45 because of the lower recoil and greater capacity, but on the streets you're thankfully not fighting against violent felons with high gunfighting skills. On that note, I want to mention the Miami-Dade shootout. I've talked about this incident before in reference to the limited capacity of the revolvers that the FBI agents used. I've also mentioned the fact that one of the surviving agents said that he would have done a lot better at stopping the criminals before they killed so many agents if he had an M16. Those things obviously do matter, but probably not as much as the ability of the good guys and gals like us to function and shoot well under stress. There was a study done regarding police shootings, and it was called SOP-9. One of the questions people wanted answered was if the officers that scored well on targets at qualification would have higher hit percentages in actual gunfights. The answer was that there was no correlation between shooting well at paper targets and shooting well in actual gunfights. Jim Cirillo was a police officer and shooting sports competitor, and he made the point that officers that had competed in shooting sports had the highest hit ratios in gunfights and were far better at winning. All officers that qualify with their gun have proven that they have been trained to shoot decently well. What they have not been trained to do is shoot well under stress. Kerry Heil had won multiple national shooting sports championships, and he was part of a SWAT team. The SWAT team had been deployed and met a dangerous suspect who pulled a gun. The other officers fired and missed the suspect, while Kerry fired 4 times with his service handgun. Each of those rounds resulted in a center hit on the suspect, and the suspect collapsed because of this. I know that other people have written a lot of rules about winning gunfights, but I prefer to keep things simple, so I have only 5 rules. These are the following. Have a concealed handgun on you when you need it. See the danger early and if possible avoid it. Be able to draw your gun quickly without fumbling. Know when to use and when not to use the gun. And finally, make good hits. First of all, you want to buy a gun that you'll actually want to carry and that you can conceal well. A gun that is too large for you will be harder to conceal and will likely be left at home as a result, so it fails the first rule of have a gun when you need it. It is my opinion that a compact pistol is the best choice for most people. It is small enough that you will actually carry it in your day-to-day life. It is not overly difficult to conceal, and it is still large enough that you don't need to make serious sacrifices in capacity or in your ability to shoot it well. Of course, smaller handguns mean smaller sight radius, more recoil for the same cartridge, smaller grips, and possibly fixed sights instead of adjustable ones. Subcompact pistols are small enough that many people can't quite fit all their fingers on the grip. This doesn't mean that they are automatically bad or unsuitable for self-defense, it just means that they are not ideal in my opinion. They also come with less capacity, obviously. There is also a couple more exceptions, and they mostly affect women. Women tend to wear more revealing clothing than men, and they tend to wear tighter, more form-fitting clothing. They also may wear skirts or dresses instead of pants. This can cause concealment problems for some women who don't want to dress in a more masculine or tomboy manner, so it makes sense for these women to carry a smaller weapon, which may be a subcompact pistol. Likewise, women tend to have smaller hands, and concerns about all your fingers fitting on a small grip may not apply as much. Now, for seeing the danger early and trying to avoid it, you have to watch the people around you, the way they behave, and be able to judge their intent. You want to specifically pay attention to their hands, because generally speaking, people will use their hands, armed or unarmed, to inflict violence on others. You can't let yourself get focused on one person who looks suspicious either. You need to keep looking at other people as well. Avoiding danger could be as simple as crossing the street to avoid walking near the person who is obviously having mental health or drug use issues. It's not hard to notice the guy talking obnoxiously loud into his cell phone and bragging about things to the person on the other end. That sort of person is more likely to engage in what John Correa of Active Self-Protection likes to call ego battles. More often than not, ego battles involve men feeling the need to boost their ego by inflicting violence on others, and are often caused by some sort of perceived slight leading to a heated argument. This is your opportunity to be the better man and first of all not engage in the argument. Second of all, if you cannot immediately leave the situation, like if you are in an elevator or bus, you would want to repeatedly apologize and say that he was in the right and you respect him so it won't happen again. You want to cater to his ego so he feels good about himself again. Then once you see he's starting to back down, move as far away from him as you can. Really, the best way to handle this situation is to make a quick apology and a quick departure. Masad Ayub has talked about how if you are confronted by some thugs who want to rob you, the best thing to do is throw some money at them, say that you don't want any trouble, and walk away. A key part of this is having something to give the money weight, like a money clip or a couple washers or quarters taped together, and a rubber band wrapped around it all to keep it together. Or if you're feeling particularly clever, you could use one of those tungsten rings that are gold colored for the weight. Tungsten, of course, is basically as heavy as gold, so at first glance it would appear to be real gold. Obviously, $5 or $10 or a cheap tungsten ring is a lot less expensive than a situation where you are put in serious danger and are forced to use lethal force to defend your life. Court costs can be very high in such a situation, and you have the possibility of being metaphorically crucified and lose your freedom because of an overzealous prosecutor, biased judge, or jury. Next, I want to talk about an incident that happened in downtown Philadelphia. A middle-aged man was walking with his female friends. 3 gangbangers arrive, make inappropriate comments, and one of them touches the rear end of one of the women. After the man tries to intervene, the 3 gangbangers severely beat him. The women watch on without intervening, but call 911. Now, my take on this situation is that you should not try to intervene like he did. Even if he had a gun, you can't just shoot someone because they made inappropriate comments and inappropriate physical contact. It's hard to say what to do in this situation. It's possible that the gangbangers may have been deterred before the violence escalated if the man used a blank firing gun or an airsoft pistol as a less lethal deterrent, but all I can really do is speculate. It would be interesting, though, to interview criminals and see how many of them would be deterred by various less lethal methods. I feel like it would also be interesting to get a police captain's opinion on what to do in this situation as well. In many cases, criminals are deterred simply by the presence of a firearm. However, if you draw your gun, that may escalate the situation to an all-out gunfight. After all, you don't know if those 3 gang members are all carrying guns too. Likewise, you also have to consider the fact that while you may be prepared to take cover and fight it out, your friends may panic and not know what to do. So by the time you've won the gunfight, you may have already lost a couple of friends. The next rule, be able to draw your handgun quickly without fumbling, is probably the easiest to follow. It simply requires you to practice your draw repeatedly, get good at drawing quickly, and have a holster that is not a hindrance. I say holster because the majority of people use a holster instead of pocket carry. Pocket carry does have a couple of advantages though. One thing that I've noticed is that you can carry a lot of stuff in your pockets and nobody really cares. You can walk around with your hands in your pockets and nobody really sees that as significantly out of the ordinary either. If you really think about it, a robber has no way of knowing if the slightly bulky item in your pocket is an overstuffed wallet or a small handgun. Police officers, though, probably will get nervous if they think you may be reaching for a gun in your pocket. By demonstrating that you are polite, friendly, and non-confrontational, most interactions with police will be a non-issue. Likewise, if you appear to be distraught, fearful, and submissive, they are more likely to see you as a victim instead of a criminal in a defensive shooting. Knowing when to use and when not to use the gun is a complicated step because it requires you to know the laws well. I'm definitely not in a position to give legal advice on this subject. All I can really do is show what someone else has said with the assumption that he knows what he is talking about. I can say that these rules do make sense, but I would also say that ultimately you would want to see a lawyer who can tell you more. Likewise, if you carry a gun, it makes sense to have a lawyer's number on your person who can help you in the case of a self-defense shooting. The last rule, make good hits, is probably the most complicated of them all. One of the best things you can do to learn to gunfight well is by competing in shooting sports. Not only does this push you to become a better shooter, but it helps you learn to function well under stress. However, Olympic air rifle shooting, for example, has very little to do with defensive shooting. Only the aspects of performing under stress and the shooting fundamentals apply to both. Shooting sports competitions do require significant investments in both time and money though, so not everyone is going to do that because it's impractical for their lifestyle. So you could get a little bit creative and find ways to put yourself under stress while you are training by yourself. For example, you might decide to shoot from a very uncomfortable position or eat hot sauce before you start shooting. Any method that is both completely safe and results in noticeable discomfort and stress is useful here. Other than stress, the other major factor of making good hits is the shooting fundamentals. I know there is some unhelpful and downright counterproductive information out there about how you're supposed to shoot, so I would be doing you a disservice if I failed to mention something so key as the fundamentals. In a survey of 32 SWAT members who had engaged in gunfights, 24 of them remembered concentrating on their front sights, and consequently they made hits. Of the remaining 8 members who did not remember using their sights, they missed. No matter what the advocates of point shooting will tell you, using your sights is crucial to your survival. In a perfect world, you'd want a perfect sight picture for every shot, but violent crime happens very quickly and from a relatively short distance. A fast sight picture, or as Jeff Cooper called it, a flash sight picture, is the priority, even if it's a little imprecise. Technically, there are 2 fundamentals here, sight alignment and sight picture, but we can make that very simple and say quickly line up your sights and focus on the front sight as you place it on the target. I should also mention an experiment that was done with officers that wore glasses or contacts. They were asked to qualify with their corrective vision first, and then shoot the qualification course a second time. Of course, the results were that when they didn't use corrective vision, the officers shot slower and lost confidence. Finally, they were asked to shoot the course again, and this time they had their weapons equipped with laser grips. Their scores returned to the same level as when they were wearing corrective vision. Their confidence was restored, and their ability to shoot quickly returned as well. What applies to lasers would also apply to red dots in my opinion. Anyway, the point here is that if your vision is not particularly good, you are very dependent on your corrective lenses, unless you have a red dot or laser sight. The obvious exception is if your vision is truly terrible without glasses, in which case even a laser sight may not help you. Now I want to talk about stance. People get too caught up in Weaver versus isosceles versus X other stance. First of all, people need to understand that the point of stance is to be balanced. So in that aspect, the particular style of stance is mostly unimportant as long as you are leaning forward slightly to counteract the recoil of the weapon. If you are not balanced right, it's easy to tell because your body keeps getting pushed with every shot. Second of all, people need to understand that the actual advancement that Jack Weaver made was not the stance part of the Weaver stance. It was the part where he started using both hands to bring the gun to eye level. Also, people keep talking about the push-pull technique in relation to the Weaver stance, without realizing that Jack Weaver did not have to deal with any significant amount of recoil because he was shooting a .38 Special. Because of differing opinions and oftentimes little supporting explanation or evidence behind a specific technique, I am quite resistant to automatically believing in what so-called experts say about shooting technique. For example, one person essentially said that a slight bend in the elbows allows the recoil to transfer into your body. Now, whether or not you bend your elbows, the recoil is obviously still going into your body, unless, of course, your grip is so poor that the gun comes flying out of your hands. Another person basically said that you should death grip your pistol while shooting to prevent an assailant from disarming you. This is a bad idea for probably multiple reasons, but I'll just mention the most readily apparent one. When you grip your pistol with all your force, what tends to happen is you accidentally press the magazine release and leave you with only one round in the chamber. Some people will also use circular logic to say that the reason why a certain technique works better is because it just works. The golden standard that every shooting instructor should be able to meet is the ability to physically demonstrate what they are saying is true. So-called experts can get away with more nonsense than you or me could because they are stating things with absolute confidence and have put themselves in a position of authority, and that is enough for people who know nothing about a subject to believe them wholesale. The same applies to proponents of pseudoscience. However, there is no bluffing the laws of physics or the limits of human biology. So if someone can't physically prove what they are saying is true, then you better be spending your time and money elsewhere. With that in mind, I wanted to mention this article that suggests the reader try an interesting experiment. First, point your fist at a friend and let them try to move it at the wrist, and then you try to do the same thing with your thumb forward. The point is to demonstrate that a thumb's forward grip is more rigid. So I tried it, and I found that if I keep my wrist rigid like I'm supposed to while shooting, it's irrelevant whether the thumb is pointed forward or not. This leads me to believe that the thumb's forward grip is not inherently better. In fact, people like Ben Stoker and the YouTuber HR Funk have rightfully pointed out that the thumb's forward grip can interfere with the controls of semi-auto pistols. I would also like to add that when you put your thumb on the frame of the pistol, it's more likely to accidentally ride the slide and cause problems that way, especially if you're wearing thick gloves and you have less dexterity. HR Funk tested the Weaver and the isosceles stance, as well as the cross thumb's grip, for speed and accuracy, and he found that there was no significant difference or advantage between them. The reason why he did this was because of the problems he's had with the thumb's forward grip. He also concluded that because of this, he was going to switch back to the thumb over thumb revolver grip, because then he could use the same grip for all of his guns. I think this argument makes a lot of sense, especially when you phrase it more like a good grip technique works for all guns. Obviously, I say this because the thumb's forward grip does not work well for revolvers because of the likelihood that your thumb will either get burned or interfere with a cylinder. Ben Stoker has also explained that grip and hand position does not matter as much as consistency. Specifically, you need to be putting a consistent amount of grip pressure on the gun and putting your hands in the same place every time you grip it and shoot. The thumb's forward grip, or straight thumb's grip, was originally created by Brian Enos and Rob Latham. According to Brian, the point of the grip is to provide consistent, even pressure around the gun. Like I mentioned before, this grip can interfere with the functioning of the gun. In the case of the Browning High Power, this can mean the support thumb contacting the slide and causing failures to feed or eject. Just so everyone knows what I am talking about, this thumbnail shows the version of the thumb's forward grip that probably the majority of people are using today. It is identical to Brian Enos's version, except for the support thumb being rested on the gun. Since I only learned about this recently, I can't say whether I think the original Brian Enos version is better than the more common later version. What I will say is that for revolvers, I dislike the version of the cross thumb's grip that HR Funk demonstrates here. The reason is I don't like having my shooting thumb under my support thumb because I would like to be easily able to cock the hammer with my firing thumb. For revolvers, I prefer to have my support thumb farther back down my shooting thumb. It was only during the making of this video that I realized that other people use this grip as well, and apparently Jerry Miculek is one of them. I don't believe that there is a formal name for this grip, so from now on I'll just refer to it as the Jerry Miculek grip. As far as I can tell, the only downside of this grip is that it only really works for revolvers because of the difference in grip shape that pistols have. Finally, I just want to say that no one has really demonstrated that the very popular newer version of the thumb's forward grip is better than the cross thumb's grip. The most logically rigorous viewers may point out that this could be interpreted as the appeal to ignorance fallacy. Except the part I mentioned before about wrist rigidity means that someone failed to physically prove that the thumb's forward grip is best. Likewise, Warrior Poet tried to demonstrate that the thumb's forward grip is the best by having a friend hold the pistol only with the support hand. What he did demonstrate is that if you are only using your support hand, the thumb's forward grip is better than some undefined other method. No one shoots like this, obviously, and he ultimately failed to demonstrate that the thumb's forward grip is better because of this. Ultimately, I think this means that you should use whatever grip method you prefer and makes the most sense to you. Finally, people always talk about why you shouldn't lock your elbows when you shoot, and they usually don't give a really good explanation why. This advice is also somewhat counterintuitive to new shooters because the gun recoils back, and you would lock up your elbows if you were trying to push a piece of heavy furniture, for example. So the reason why you shouldn't lock your elbows is because that undermines the amount of pressure your hands can put on either side of the gun. This matters both for keeping a secure grip in recoil and a secure grip in the event that a violent criminal tries to disarm you. You can demonstrate this yourself by locking your elbows and trying to pull on an open door. You'll find that when you don't lock your elbows, you get more grip. Next, I want you to look at this stance and ask yourself, how much pressure would it take to push or pull this woman forward? Not much, I bet. She is an excellent shooting sports competitor, but that means she is prepared for recoil, not a random criminal trying to overpower her and disarm her while she is competing. Her wide stance does give her a significant amount of stability if she was pushed from either side. However, if you are standing and facing someone, it is far more likely that they try to pull you forward or push you back because those are both easy to do to someone you are facing. You can avoid such an exaggerated stance by simply standing more upright, leaning forward a bit, and putting more weight into the foot that is farther forward. There is also the idea that you can make yourself a smaller target by turning your side to face the assailant. I think that this is a really bad idea because you are inadvertently increasing your odds of multiple organ failure. The obvious problem is that a single bullet can now penetrate both lungs and your heart all at once. I also want to mention that there is a very good video on the Terran Tactical YouTube channel that gives a very concise yet detailed explanation of how to grip a pistol and why. I want to briefly talk about pressing the trigger. There seems to be relatively little debate about the fact that you need to have a smooth, consistent trigger press with the pad of your finger. However, when I fire a particularly heavy double-action revolver trigger, it's quite clear that I get a more consistent and smoother trigger press if I use the crease of my finger instead. It simply requires less effort on my part to press the trigger this way. The only other thing I want to say about this is that dry firing a lot costs nothing and also helps quite a bit. Now I want to address the point of learning to shoot with your support, aka non-dominant hand. My opinion is that I can't think of a situation where you would need to do this other than if your dominant hand is injured. This makes sense only from a surface perspective. I am cross-eye dominant. I am right-handed and my left eye is the dominant one. So if the length of the pole of a weapon is short enough, I will shoot it from my left shoulder with my right hand on the grip like usual. If the stock is too long for that, then I just close my left eye and shoot from my right shoulder. There is a YouTuber that claims he is teaching you how to become ambidextrous. First of all, you don't learn to become ambidextrous. You are either born that way or you aren't. Essentially, his technique involves somehow blocking the dominant eye, usually with an object like cover, so the non-dominant eye is what focuses on the sights. He also shows how to transition the rifle from one hand to the other. Neither of these things are really important though. The way to get your non-dominant eye to focus on your sights is as simple as closing your dominant eye. Transitioning the rifle from one hand to the other and shooting with your non-dominant hand is adding a significant amount of unnecessary complexity. You can just move the rifle from your right shoulder to your left without changing anything else. Likewise, if you have a pistol, you don't need to switch hands because all you need to do is move the pistol over to your left side more. So now we get to the part where we talk about what happens if your dominant hand or arm is injured. For some reason, people will make the assumption that the dominant hand or arm can still be used for support for a rifle or shotgun even if it's injured. If you remember Paul Harrell's video about the Miami-Dade shootout, you know that the one agent was wounded and his one arm was not useful at all because of the wound, so he had to shoot a pump-action shotgun one-handed. We can also apply this logic to handguns. If you are shot in your dominant hand and it is damaged to the point where you can't shoot with it, there is a good chance that the handgun has fallen out of your hand because of the severed muscles failing to grasp the handgun correctly. If you are concerned about having your dominant hand damaged, You need to be training to pick up the handgun from the ground, or you should have a backup handgun available to your non-dominant hand. This is in addition to learning reloads and clearing malfunctions. All of these points seem very obvious to me, so I don't understand why no one else seems to have thought of them.